Job search checklist. This is Mark, and we're here every week, every Friday, 1 p.m. We came a little bit behind today, experiencing some technical problems on my end, but I'll do the best that I can. With me every week, of course, is Damian Birkel. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's good
Great,
to be back.
great. And he is the one with the big organization of professionals in transition. Has helped more than 10,000 job seekers throughout his tenure since 1992. That's a long time. And joining us this week to help us parse the chaff from the weeds is Jessica Sweet. Joining us, I think this is the first time for this show. And yeah, I have to get my shows straight, Jessica. But she is a veteran career coach and with a lot of accolades, and a lot of people love her and love her LinkedIn advice. And of course, if you go to her website, Damien was just telling how well designed it is. So you're in for a treat if you need some help with your job search. And if you have any questions, always feel free to interrupt us as we talk about different topics so that we can stop and talk about what you need to do in your job search. So we're going to go ahead and get it started. And, we're talking about career change this week. And really, in hindsight, really every episode that we have seems to have a change of careers motif to it, if you will, or a subtitle, and you can position it any way you like. But we're going to particularly talk about the things that are going to help people change careers. And unfortunately, we don't have the machines that tells you what's going to be your best career. So let's be sure we get clear about that. But we will try to get you to that point of figuring things out and kind of get you on that road. One of the first questions I thought about like 10 different questions in different directions. But I think one of the things that people get stuck on very much is the idea of selling that themselves and what that actually is and what that actually looks like. And for some people who don't prepare, very often overthink and overtalk the people that are involved. So they think that they can actually talk their way into position. And I've found that through my experience to be the bad way of selling yourself. But really, what does it take to market yourself these days in 2022 without the selling tactics of the past? Jessica, we'll start with you. What are
Yeah,
your thoughts?
cool. Yeah, thanks. Um, well, I mean, people always talk about relationships, right? I mean, it's a lot about building a relationship, and people hire people. So I think it really is about building relationships with people and
Hmm.
letting people know what you can do for them. It's really what is in it for the other person. So it's not about, hey, I can do this for you. I'm awesome at this. But it's like, I am, I'm getting to know you. I want to know what you do. I want to know about your company or your work, your experience, your history, your accomplishments. Um, and now we've built a relationship. And along the way, you're learning about me, you're learning about what I do, what I've done, that sort of thing. And, you know, that relationship can naturally evolve into um, potentially a job, potentially a referral, that sort of thing. So it's not so much about finding a target and then pushing yourself on them. It's about building relationships that can bloom into opportunities for you down the road. So that's my thought about it. I think that the place where people get stuck on that is they need a job now, and they don't necessarily have time to nurture those relationships. They feel like they need something immediately. So I would encourage people to really think about, what relationships do you have already? Where can you pick up on those relationships? where you left off. And really remember that if you feel weird about picking up where you left off, those people that you haven't talked to in a long time also haven't talked to you in a long time. So you don't have to necessarily feel weird about not having reached out, because they also haven't reached out. So being the first to reach out is actually a good thing, especially if you're not reaching out with, hey, I need a job. You're reaching out with, hey, how are you? How have you been? How's work? How are the kids? Like whatever it is, depending on your level of familiarity with that person. So, so that's what I would say. I would say, like, really try to invest in those relationships again, and see what you can do to build those relationships. What do you think, Damian?
I agree. A little shorthand that I use that I learned from Dr. Nito Cobain and other motivational speakers is the station that everyone is listening to, which is WIFM. What's in it for me?
Yep.
And if you speak, that is when you're interviewing, to the person's needs and concentrate on building rapport first and anything else later. But also, Jessica, to your point about always reaching out, keeping as many people engaged in various relationships as you can as you go through time. Because if you are out there and you are providing service to others, if you're doing things when they call you and say, hey, I couldn't get anybody else, but could you? And
Mhm.
you're the yes person, people will remember that. And in many cases, at least with me, every position, except for maybe when I started, has come to me most of the time. I'd say 90% of the time when I wasn't looking for a job. And that has been based on relationships. And sometimes you interact with a person and touch them in a way that they will remember. And if you lose your job and you are very active in the employment community, in the community at large, on LinkedIn, word's going to get out pretty quickly that you've lost your job. And people love to help. What they don't like is being backed into a corner. And the quickest way to shut down, temporarily anyways, a relationship or an acquaintance is to ask them directly for a job, because you've moved them from a yes situation where you can share information about the kids and your job and what have you, to a no situation. No one likes to disappoint you, especially when you're out of work. But um, if you force them to say, no, I don't have a job for you, I don't ever expect to have a job for you, etc., then you've put up this artificial barrier that in your desperation, because I've been there, desperate for a job,
Mhm.
it shows. And it will also show in your interviewing. And again, if you have a broad structure of folks that you have worked with and continue to work with throughout your career, it does make it easier for you to reach out to those that you may have fallen out of touch with. But if you're calling people and you've only talked to them once and it's been 15 years, they probably won't even know who you are, let alone be willing to help you with your job search.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point, which you touched on a few seconds ago, which was being active in the community, whether it's on LinkedIn or in your like in real life community, and being somebody that's just helpful. And that's a concept that I've found people that I've talked to maybe struggle with a little bit, just in terms of time. So a lot of my clients are super helpful people. They're problem solvers. They love people, period. They love to help people, but they're also really busy. They've got families sometimes. They're hard workers. Um, they may be working and job searching at the same time, or they're just job searching. But whatever it is, the idea of being out in the community and being helpful can sometimes feel overwhelming on top of everything else. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I talk about with people is really finding a signature way to be helpful, something that's really in your wheelhouse and on brand for you. So thinking about finding something that you're actually super good at. So, for example, I actually got off a call this morning with a friend slash colleague who reached out to me for help with creating a story around and writing something for his brand, and kind of pitching something. And it's kind of a signature way that I have of helping people in my community, in my sphere, because it's something that I consider myself good at, is like kind of coming up with creative stories. So if you have a way of helping people, whether it's writing or whether it's solving a problem or whether it's like creating spreadsheets or doing financials for people, like whatever it is, um, find something in your wheelhouse that you're good at and maybe contributes to your brand. And that is, something that's a go-to and that can help you maybe further your career. You become known for it.
Yeah, I think that people are often they're thinking of the old way of and the examples they've seen through movies and TV, right? Because of the sensationalism is in it, and the results that they may have heard about in the past. But really, I agree with everyone. Being helpful is the best way to market yourself, and to really even come up with. And we're talking about being helpful as far as someone's needs, not just to be helpful in general. And I think we all get the LinkedIn invite saying, there's anything I can do, let me know. And that, which means you paid absolutely no attention to what I do and how I do it and who I do it with.
Mhm.
Now, if someone's really ahead of the game, then they've already thought of ways. They've offered you first, more than likely. And then they understand too that over time, things actually happen, and it's not a self gratification, desperation move like a lot of times that people tend to do. But I think really people are not thinking in the long term when they go the wrong route, because really it's a shooting star. It burns out really fast, and you get someone's attention only for such a little time. You just wonder how some people make it as long as they do. And I think people make it with other people who are also desperate, who are also, because birds of a feather flock together. I
Mhm.
think it becomes really obvious when someone tries to be more helpful. Unusually, they don't even know you or what your needs are. And I think that's where the employer comes in. If you don't know the employer's needs, how are you going to be able to help them? And
Mhm.
you have to think of it that kind of transferable type of communication, helping others, helping the employer. Now, we everybody knows what your end game is, and they shouldn't be ashamed to that, but that doesn't mean that you should not cook your food before you eat it. That's really what we're talking about here when we talk about marketing and just being tactical and practical and being helpful in those kinds of ways. And I think that's where people get it wrong. I know people who can, my son can sell anything, but he knows the ends of the means is that I got to be helpful before people actually will listen and engage.
Mhm. Right. And it's not a disingenuous type of thing. It's just you do want to be out there, in whatever communities and whatever spheres, doing what you do best so that people want you, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what Damien said about most people are they're tuned into WIME. What's in it for me? And it's sad because by now we've been in LinkedIn for a number of years now, and every year the same thing is being said. with somebody else trying to come in and think that they're going to have the magic elixir because they're there, and maybe they perceive a halos over their head, and it's not.
Mhm.
It's very often is quite the quite the opposite, and it's an easy way to get muted or disconnected from someone, because really people now too have also grown um, a little impatient and intolerant, which I can understand, because there are hundreds of people that have come before them, and perhaps thousands. So, yeah, marketing yourself, being smart. Did you have anything else to add there, Damien?
No, that's good. I think we really did a good job of hitting everything.
Well, mostly you guys did the job. I was having audio problems trying to settle this all. I was and it's like, I had to go old school. So there we go. So that kind of goes into the next phase where we talk about really changing careers, and I think a lot of times changing careers, and I heard somebody just recently say it, is really about the narrative. And it's not just about and we're talking about narrative, a holistic narrative. We're not just talking about the one thing that will, change people's minds. But I think we should have a little bit of a discussion about what the difference between good storytelling, and we're talking about all everything that encompasses you marketing yourself, and just making statements. And Damien, why don't you start off? I know you have a few good anecdotes for that.
Um, Storytelling is an art. Storytelling has a clear beginning, something interesting in the middle, uh, maybe a little bit of humor, and what you learned. And when a person listens to your story, they kind of envision what you're talking about. They follow along with you, and they become engaged with you.
Hmm.
If you are trying to sell yourself, you know, a person can only listen to so much, and then they're thinking about other stuff while you're just going on and on.
Hmm.
Um, it also ties into building rapport with the person.
Hmm.
Again, it really comes down to this: if I like you, I may hire you, and if I don't, I won't. And the third point is a story differentiates you from other candidates because it also shows humanness. Humanness. Sometimes it shows vulnerability, uh, but it is a type or way of communicating that a person can kind of imagine themselves in the same position and listen and let it resonate and let them react. So it's a two-way conversation, and you as the storyteller need to be very good at reading a person's body language because they may be interested and are being polite, or they may be getting ready to cut you
Cut
off
you off.
because time is going to run out. Um, so it's a true art, and it's something that you have to practice constantly to uh, to stay sharp and effective in telling the story.
Yeah. And, I think that effective storytelling just gives a certain amount of intrigue, right? You're able to somewhat tease people into listening to you and listening for the ultimate message that you're trying to send. And I think people get the idea that they're telling. I sometimes cringe when I see people on LinkedIn telling their story, and every story is this very long diatribe that sometimes really has nothing, doesn't lead to anywhere, but they feel like they have to. And Jessica, perhaps you might have some feelings about this. They feel like they have to be very vulnerable on a deep level in order to get people you know to listen to them. But the more you do it, I think the more you tend to wear people out. And I'm not saying that that's a rule that you could apply to every particular platform, but sometimes it's like okay, here we go. So and so is about to tell their story, and usually the nucleus is the thing that they struggle and sometimes deeply personal, which becomes really, uncomfortable at times. But I think that people need to tell targeted stories and kind of have a point behind it that's going to relate to the audience where you want to guide them at that particular time. Sometimes I'm seeing storytelling and they're guiding them to the same place every single time. Do you have feelings like that, or how does that hit you?
For me,
Yes.
yeah. So, I mean, I do think there should be a strategy behind the stories you're telling, and where you're telling them. So, for LinkedIn stories, or not LinkedIn stories, the thing of LinkedIn stories, but
Right.
telling stories on LinkedIn, like in posts and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a reason that you're posting on LinkedIn. There needs to be a strategy behind your posts for sure. You need to be thinking about who is your audience, what is the action you're wanting them to take, what is the feeling that you're trying to conjure up, or the message you're trying to convey. Absolutely. And then in career change, you can make, I think about resume. So you can put a lot of statements on your resume. You had this accomplishment, you did um, this task. But there's a difference between a resume that has a lot of statements on it and a resume that tells a story of why you can do the job that you're going to be asked to do, especially a career change resume, which by its very nature is a resume that shows that you've done stuff in the past, but you haven't done the exact thing that you're going to be doing or you're trying to do, right? So
Hmm.
that resume has to tell a story. My past will allow me to do the thing that you're going to give me the chance to do, right? Here's the story behind why I can do it. It's not just a bunch of bullets, right? Because that
Right.
requires the reader to say, I can take these bullets and put them together in a way that shows me that this person can do what I'm asking them to do. That's a
Hmm.
cognitive leap that you're asking the reader to make, right? You're
Hmm.
asking them to take the time to put that information together. And
Right.
that's too much time. That 6 seconds, right? We have all heard that statistic of 6 seconds. That's
Hmm.
that's as much time as they get to read it. That's not enough time to make that leap of information. Like, oh, how does this all fit together into a story of does this add up to now they can do this job? No, you need to put that story together on a resume, in your LinkedIn, in the conversations you're having. This is why what I have done means that I can do what you're asking me to do, right? That's the
Hmm.
story, that's the through line. That's what you need to tell, especially for career change, but even for promotion, right? Or
Mhm.
for different industry, even if it's the same kind of career, lots of different things will need a story. Even in interviews, right? You can't just say, I've had great sales. Fantastic. But why are you going to have great sales for me?
Yeah.
Right? You need the story behind it. And that's why stories are so much more important and powerful than statements, I think. And that's why that's where a strategy behind posts and different things like that comes into play. How are you going to tell those stories so that people are like, oh, here's a conclusion. Here's a
Hmm.
conclusion that I can draw from this statement. Not
Yeah.
just, I've had a terrible childhood. Like, that's sad and people might resonate with that. But here's a conclusion about this person that now tells me there's some value here.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think people really get on the boat where they're not realizing that even a one line or a 1 line and a half bullet can be an actual story, and a
Mhm.
story could be told. And I think people are still trying to work out as well holistically. I'm not saying everybody does, but the people wondering what story, how to get the LinkedIn profile and the resume and cover letters involved, and how do those to all align in one
Yeah.
story. And I think people often are thinking still in terms of statements. So there seems to be a stop and start point, and people wonder what is the message that you're ultimately trying to send. What is your unique value proposition, and why should I hire you? And
Mhm.
to also, are you really speaking to that person, that audience, that person as an audience, as opposed to just in general? Because people could
Yes.
tell where the disconnect is, and sometimes the questions will reflect that, and even the questions that people can't answer will expose them for not making it all cohesive. Damien?
Yeah, I this kind of relates. And it's kind of my approach. Yes, your resume needs to look good. Yes, it needs to have keywords, and yes, you're going to get just a very short amount of time for somebody to skim it. But when I have people do bullet points, I actually ask them to make them challenge points. What I mean by
Mm,
that is if you have a strong accomplishment where there has been a huge increase in this or that or a savings of, that's an invitation for whoever the person is who's reading your resume. And as different people read it, different bullet points will be of interest, but you want them to challenge you and ask you, how did you increase sales by yada, yada, yada? Because that's when you then circle around and tell a story, short story. But again, the bullet points that you put out, yes, have to be quantifiable and measurable and benefit driven. But if it's just plain Jane, um,
mhm,
it could very easily get skimmed over. Now, I'm not saying exaggerate, make up, or anything like that when it comes to facts, figures, or what have you. What I am saying is anything that you put on your resume, you should be prepared to defend with a
mhm,
story that's interesting and something that will make the other person kind of go, okay, well, if you did it for X company, then that transferable skill he'll bring with him if you were to come and work for me doing this position. So you're creating that bridge. Another critical part of storytelling is many times people apply for positions and they don't hit 100% of the qualifications. Well, very rarely does anybody hit 100% of the qualifications. But if you're in an interview and there is a specific talent requirement or whatever that you did not have, where your storytelling skills come in, is when you can say, you know what, you're right. But I did this, that, and the other thing, which, although it isn't exactly stated on the position, is similar. And you prevent yourself from being discarded because you don't have a qualification that's uh, required. It's kind of like the glue that holds an interview together, so that people are engaged and interested. Same thing with LinkedIn. And I think one of the things that people have to be careful about is, if you have a very sad story, understandable, but every time you broadcast that to the world, and employers are picking it up, reading it, or whatever, in some cases that can impact your feasibility as a candidate, because either you have a good story and you overcame it, but if you tell the story over and over and over and over again, it's going to circulate around and could weaken your your story, your persona as much as it could strengthen it. And it all comes down to how you tell the story and who you tell it to.
right. And when you say the challenge, you're talking about the challenge, action, and result type of approach.
Well, actually, and that is the approach: problem,
Hmm.
action, result. But I was talking about people that when you hear them talk, they go off and they tell you the same story over and over and over again.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, okay, I already heard that once. So again, you have to be very cognizant of what you are communicating verbally, and also cognizant of how you're communicating when you put it into writing. Because and we've learned this with COVID, that something that you could say in light, and the person would pick up the humor and the twinkle in your eyes and the tone of your voice. You put something similar down like that in an email, and it can be taken the wrong way, because many times you get an email and you immediately react to it without any without any background, without having any real frame to what the person has said. So again, storytelling is important. It is important who you tell to and how, and it also is important whether you're doing it verbally or whether you're doing it written.
So if I were to reimagine this, and Jessica, you can jump in here if you'd like to, is that if let's say I'm going to interview with a company, and upon my research, I find out that they had some challenges in dealing with COVID. I want to tell a COVID related story where I had a challenge in how I overcome it. So that way I might be able to also say, hey, I had this challenge, but I also came up with some solutions that perhaps that person needs to hear. So therefore, you kind of not only get their attention, but they might find some value in the way that you handled COVID and the way that you were able to transition. And maybe that might be something they can either use or pass on, or continue to ask you about, because that's where their weakness might be. So therefore, it's not a challenge that, that somebody's doubting you, but somebody sees that as something that, okay, I need to ask a couple of more questions to see exactly how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
Is that would be a good example of what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Jessica, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think in an interview situation, the goal is always to get people to be curious, ask more questions, and you want to be prepared to dive deeper, keep them engaged, give them information, and you know, have the stories to illustrate the work you've done, the work that you can do, and you know, how you can solve their pain points. So yeah, I agree. I agree that the resume and the things that you've done, or the challenge points, as you put it, Damian, those are great jumping off points into the things that you can then do for the next company.
Hmm. Hmm. One of the things I also think about is some of the basics of storytelling that we grew up with as kids. Well, at least I did in that sense, in the sense of, that there is a protagonist and there's an antagonist. There's the hero, and there's the someone that is against. Now, you're not ever going to want to make a person an antagonist in an interview or on your resume, of course, but you are making a process or a hindrance that antagonist. But I think a lot of people tend to fail to make themselves the protagonist or make themselves the hero in that story comprehensively. And and yeah, we can say bragging about yourself. I'm not crazy completely about how that's used in many contexts, because it isn't a bragging if you have been the solution, to the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love that so much. I've never thought about it that way, but I love the protagonist antagonist, with the antagonist being the problems that you're overcoming, and you being the hero of the story, and you positioning yourself like that.
Yeah, you essentially are. And I think it's just that basic, and I think that will also keep people from making statements. Instead, think of, okay, now that I'm the hero, what was my part even in saving the day, or saving the
Mhm.
project, or being the solution, as I always say, you're the prescription to the employer's job description, so to speak.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So you are that kind of person, and there's no reason why you can't be that way throughout, comprehensively through everything that you do. And even when you post on LinkedIn and you tell your stories, it's okay to be the protagonist. And it's not that you are always, again, the problem is the process, and is not the person. And when you make someone that it makes someone the antagonist, even though they might rightfully deserve that, people will look at that a little bit differently than making the actual problem the antagonist, so to
Mhm.
speak. So,
That
uh,
that's
good,
good.
good. Okay, so let's move on to the next point as soon as it can come up. Um, in a job search, there are things that will definitely go wrong, and you should be ready to to tackle anything that comes across. But um, what is the best way, for for people to handle things that may happen in a job search, like a bad interview, um, a mistake, a fact mistake, um, where you might have thought something was one way, it was actually the other. I think people tend to get scared, and be held back by that one error, that may come across. So really, we're talking about, just like my little thing down there, we're talking about overcoming obstacles,
Mhm.
ultimately. Damien, um, what are some things that people can do that help them overcome some of their obstacles? And you can list your own that you've come up with, but an obstacle and solution on how they can move around or move over what obstructs their ability to perform well.
One of the things, and I interviewed for a number of positions. As you know, I've lost my job 5 times across my career, and
Hmm.
it's easy to become hypersensitive. It's easy to blame any mistake that you make like it's the end of the world when
Hmm.
it really isn't. And what I encourage people is understand that it's a volatile time, understand that what you're going through, in many cases, you've never gone through before. That's a process, that there's trial and there is a lot of error as you
Hmm.
learn, because everyone has their own individual job search. And at the end of the day, what I tell myself to kind of salve any wounds is that I made the best decision with the best information that I had at the time that I made the decision. And what that flips around to is, if you have a bad interview, there's things that you can do to attempt to salvage it. If you quoted a number that was wrong, or you transposed a number or whatever, and they called you on it, recognize it. Don't try to cover it up. And if you drew a blank on a question, when you write to them with your thank you note, fill in whatever it was that you may have forgotten, because job searching is very stressful. And when you have been out for a prolonged period of time, each time you make a mistake, it feels like you're Sisyphus and you've rolled that rock boulder almost to the very top of the mountain, and then
Hmm.
it comes back down and it flattens you. Um, and if you take everything personally each and every time, instead of, and it took me a long time to do this, to step outside of yourself and look at the job search as a process. And when you think about getting rejection letters or it goes into the black hole, understand that on the other end, on the receiving end, there are people just like you that are time starved, that are doing the very best that they can, that sometimes have very unrealistic expectations on them in terms of a candidate. And again, don't go crazy. I mean, try to keep that perspective of it's just a process. And I
Mm-hmm.
know I've shared this before, but literally, um, I started a no list and I would log every time I got a no. And I was on no number 87 before I got my job.
Mm-hmm.
If I would have stopped after no number 86 and thrown up my hands and just have said, I'm no good, I'm never going to get there, blah, 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 well, I would have never had it, picked myself up, tried again, and went on to number 87 to get the job.
Yeah, I've always loved that story that you've told. Having known you for a lot of years now, but knowing that you lean into the no and you made it motivational for you and you turned it around. Love it every time. Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things that I see a lot is people um, looking at the process and feeling like they just don't know what's going wrong. Like they get those rejections. It's not as obvious as blanking an interview question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that. When that happens, it's like, oh, okay, I see what happened. I see what went wrong here. But when you get a call from a recruiter and it seems so promising, right? And you're super excited, and then
Mm-hmm.
you don't hear anything, and you email them and you're like, hey, like still interested, what's going on? And you still don't hear anything. You're like, what is going on? And that keeps happening to you, or some version of that. And you're so confused about what's happening and why it's going nowhere. That's a theme I see a lot, is like people being in the process and really not understanding why it's not moving forward, and having the mistakes that they're making be not obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say don't do it alone. Really surround
Mm.
yourself with people who can support you, whether that's a coach or a friend, or groups, online, or an online course or a book, or like whatever you can do. Don't just like plow through it, because it is extremely frustrating. It's
Yeah.
extremely frustrating. So whatever you can do to try to figure out how to make the process go smoother and better, and to get some support, I would say do that, because otherwise it just is maddening. That's what I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. Damien, you want to add something on to what Jessica said?
I was, and that is with the 24/7 internet, it is so easy to become a 24/7 job seeker.
Mm-hmm.
And I always encourage people to start at the same time and end at the same time, and turn off your laptop over the weekend so you can reclaim other vital roles that are you, parent, spouse, Boy Scout leader, whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
not get into this continuous 24/7 cycle, because not only are you going to burn out, but when it comes to interviewing, you're going to be exhausted,
Yeah.
and it will show. And so it's important to recognize our vulnerability as humans, especially when we're under incredible stress, to allow ourselves to breathe a little bit and to let go of the job search. I mean, probably not here, but at least you're not here. And that'll give you a break. I was working with a candidate who had been a 24/7 job seeker. That's what she thought. That's what her spouse thought. And finally, I told her, go home. Promise me you'll turn off the computer and not turn on until Monday morning, and then come in on Tuesday and tell me what it was like. She said it rejuvenated everything, their personal life. They went out. She was able to finally unwind a little bit, and it actually sped up her job search because, again, she wasn't coming across as desperate. And
Mhm.
no matter how you feel, and trust me, I have been desperate for work. When you interview, you have to be very careful that you don't show that, because
Mhm.
it will be a natural kind of pushback if you do. That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah. Something I like, I'm gonna make it even more elementary than this. There are times when people make mistakes in an interview or in a conversation where maybe a fact or something that they have said, or they said something without the right context, or they didn't give enough information. It's okay to go back and tell the interviewer, hey, I like to go back to something I said earlier because I don't think I gave you everything that you need to know about this to for you to make an informed decision. And you know what? That is okay. Even if it's somebody that you networked with and you told the story, you might even think of it later. Let's say you had an interview one day and the next day you think of something. It's okay to try to say, I need to go back and retract that. Sometimes it depends on the relationship you may have with the interviewer, but a lot of times they appreciate if that might make even a small difference that you go back and say, hey, you know what? I don't think I told you the complete truth about this because I didn't understand what you were really asking. This is what I understand that you were asking, and this is the whole story. And sometimes it's not that maybe you lied; it's just maybe a matter of perspective or misunderstanding what somebody's asking. So a lot of times you have to go back and correct some wrongs at times. And I'm not saying that you will or you won't, but it happens. And sometimes it just happens to be the state of mind that you have because interviewing is hard.
Mhm.
Interviewing is hard, and especially if you have to interview with several people for an hour, that drains a lot of energy and it drains a lot of your ability to be objective about whatever you say. And of course, you want to be able to tell it objectively, but at the same time, you want to also make sure that the right context meets the right story because somebody may have a question about it later. You'll be able to also add integrity to your presence, and that's that you want to correct something that you may have said that may not have been true or may not have been the complete story or that you misunderstood the question. Sometimes those small things make a difference, and you can kind of apply that across the board, whether it's a networking situation where that person's going to be may want to refer you, but they might have some doubts about something, and you go back and correct it. Then that pushes you and elevates you a little bit forward. So those kinds of things I think will make sometimes a small difference will make a big difference.
Mhm.
Did you guys did either one of you? I learned not to say you guys when talking to men and women, right? I try really hard, and I've been trying to break myself that for a lot of years, even though it's accepted. But did either one of you have want to add anything before we sign off?
And that is, yeah, you may find that you go back and you do a course correct, and the person has already, you know, scratched you off the list, and that's okay, because
Yes.
what you need to ask yourself is, if I was expected to be 100% accurate 100% of the time whenever I'm at my work, is this a company that I really want to work for?
Hmm.
Because we're all humans, and when you support a boss or someone, they'll make mistakes. It all depends on you, how you manage that for them.
Hmm.
My point being is that move on.
Yeah.
If you have done a course correct and you've done it with integrity and it doesn't work, you can at least tell yourself, again, you did everything that you could to right a situation, big or small, and
Right.
and keep moving, because it's not worth your time to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jessica?
I would just say that going back and doing that, if you're questioning should I go back and call attention to something that maybe I made a mistake on, but maybe they didn't notice, or maybe and I should just let it slide versus maybe I should say something. Saying something, I think shows one, integrity was a word I think both of you used, and then two, it shows that you really care. It shows that you care about the job. It shows that you care about being correct. So I mean, it just shows care. And so I
Yeah.
would say if you are invested in that role, I would go back and make that correction. So to Damian's point, if they ding you for that for some reason, if they didn't notice and now they're like, oh my gosh, this person made a mistake and now they're pointing it out, like that's not a company you really want to work for. So
Right.
if they look kindly upon that, like, oh, this person actually really cares about their work, they're going to go back and they're going to correct mistakes that they made, and they
Mhm.
were conscientious enough to point out when they made a mistake when they didn't have to, and they look at it that way, then that's the company you want to work for.
Mhm.
So I would say if you're questioning whether you should go back and do that, I would do it if it's a job that you care about.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And plus, I think these days, in my opinion, we're not we're not 6 degrees of separation anymore. We're to some degree maybe 3 or 4 degrees of separation.
Mhm.
And there have been times when I've heard stories, and when I was doing one-on-one coaching, I had a story like this, and Damien's heard this before, is that the person that they were interviewing with knew the person personally that that person was working for. So if you might be one ask away from whether that person perceives you as being integral or that you're an obstruction. And
Mhm.
I think it's better to assume that they might be one person away from hearing the other side of the story. Because a lot of times people tell stories, they assume that only you don't get that side of it. That's not true. And I've even been on the other end where somebody interviewed with a company I used to be with, and that person called me and said, I know you know so and so, and they told these stories. And I had to say, well, you know, that's not the way I remember it, is the way I think I put it. I tried to be as diplomat, and they caught my drift because they know who I was. So having seen both sides and been on both sides in that kind of way, yeah, I think there just needs to be that kind of care when you do, even if it doesn't end up being anything to that person. They said that person took it took a lot for them to come back and correct it, and and it can't be nothing but positive. Even if they just think that you're a great person because of that, that's a positive, because that could end up being something down the line. You just never
Yep.
know.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we are one past the hour, and Jessica Sweet, we thank you very much for joining us here on Modern Job Search Checklist. Is there one thing you want to brag about? Maybe a podcast episode that's coming up, or maybe you're going to be featured on the Today Show or something like that. Maybe maybe this is a good time to let us know what's going on with you. Anything we like to follow?
Oh, that's so nice of you. Well, first, thank you guys for having me. I really had fun with you this hour.
Awesome.
Um, and then second, let's see. I have a job search group for folks that are looking to get some help job searching, and also
Awesome.
want to have some networking and just have some fun while it's happening, because it can be discouraging. So you can check that out on my website.
Good deal. Good deal. Damien, what you got coming up?
Yeah, this is really interesting. Sometimes when you uh, respond to a reporter's query, it's anonymous, and you have no idea where
Mm-hmm.
it's going. And this was a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I talked about if you are a very shy person, the type of non-threatening igniter questions that you can ask to break the ice, and
Hmm.
it ends up that that is going to be in an article in Australia where they're going to gather introverts for barbecues. The government is doing this, and this
Hmm.
story is basically a hand to a person who's an introvert and say, memorize these questions, and when you go to the queue, you won't have to stand off in the corner because here are non-threatening conversational starter questions. And for me, I answered it because I thought it was a very good question, but you just never know. And it's the same way with a job search. You don't know who is going to come to your aid to help you with your job search. And in my experience, it is many times someone that I knew or someone that another person knew, or sometimes it's a call out of the blue, and you just have to be open to the process and run with it. And just one other thing real quick. If you're interviewing and you get asked a question and you draw a blank, and I think we've all been there, follow this, look them right in the eye, smile, and say, that's a really good question. I need a minute to think about it. And 9 times out of 10, by the time that you say that, the synapses in your brain have fired enough for you to be able to answer the question. And the reason why that's so important is so that if you get shocked while you're interviewing, you're on the phone or what have you, with a question like that, you can quickly shut yourself down and kind of mess with the flow that you've worked so hard to establish. So by just interrupting the conversation for just a minute, you don't lose that really good impression that you've worked so hard to build, and you cover the topic. You just needed, a second or two to think about it. And I've used it many times across many types of interviews, and it works like a charm because people understand. People would rather you take a minute to think about the question that they asked than just blurt out an answer.
Hmm. That's a great one. That adds on to, sometimes for people that's an obstacle to think of things, and then being able to answer on the spot. Interviewers tend to, surprise people at times, so it's good to. That's a great technique to be able to give you moments to think. Uh, I have been. Let's see. I was a part of a panel earlier this week, and I saw a little bit today of it, and it was just great discussion. It was headed by Annette Richmond on her
Ah,
Smart Career Moves show that we did, and it was along with Lisa Rangel, Hannah Morgan, and myself. It was a great panel, and if you want to catch it, you can. I'll share it again on my Twitter timeline sometime today. But you can also go to any of those profiles, and also the podcast episode that dropped this week, which was really a great conversation. And I'm not saying it because I was a part of it, but it was really everybody else that was a part of it. That was with Hannah Morgan, Robin Ryan, and Jack Kelly that we did about a month ago about the 2022 trends. That's another value field show. So hats off to them on being on my podcast and rebroadcasting it there. So in the meantime, we're back next Friday, and feel free to join us then. In the meantime, thank you very much. You're listening or watching the Modern Job Search Checklist. We always stream to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Though this week we're not going to Facebook because they're annoying. Uh, so there you have it. Thank you, and you all have a great day. We're just signing off. Have a good one.